Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and member of the former Commission of Inquiry on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, Ms. Sheila Keetharuth, to make an introductory statement and to present an oral update. Ms. Keetharuth, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, today I will brief you in my capacity as a member of the former Commission of Inquiry on the human rights in Eritrea. I will present the final report of the Commission, which, with the reference A/HRC/32/47, which was jointly presented to the Human Rights Council by the three commissioners, Mike Smith as chair, Victor Dankwa, and myself as members in June 2016. In its work, the Commission has been at all times guided by the principles of independence, impartiality, objectivity, transparency, integrity, and the principle of do no harm. The protection of witnesses and victims was a central concern of the Commission. After the Commission submitted its first report to the Human Rights Council in June 2015, documenting a multitude of human rights violations in Eritrea, the Council unanimously approved, and without a vote, a resolution that mandated the Commission to determine whether these violations might amount to crimes against humanity and to address the issue of accountability. In its final report, submitted to the Council in June 2016, as I mentioned earlier, the Commission has concluded that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Eritrean officials have committed crimes against humanity since 1991. The crimes of enslavement, imprisonment, and forced disappearances, torture, other inhumane acts, persecution, rape, murder have been committed as part of a widespread and systematic campaign against the civilian population. The aim of the campaign has been to maintain control over the population and perpetuate the leadership's rule in Eritrea. I wish to highlight some of the crimes the Commission has documented in its final report. With regard to the crime of enslavement, the Commission found that the violations relating to Eritrea's military/national service programs include arbitrary and indefinite duration, often for years beyond the 18-month set out in the law, their involuntary nature, the use of conscripts as forced labor, including manual labor, the inhumane conditions of service, the rape and torture often associated with this military and national service programs, and the devastating impact on family life and freedom of choice. For these reasons, the Commission concluded that Eritrean officials have committed the crime of enslavement. Despite reported promises to the contrary, the Eritrean government has taken no steps to address any of the problems associated with its military and national service programs. The Commission has also documented the extensive use of arbitrary arrest and detention across Eritrea. Detainees are very rarely brought before a judge after arrest or tried, and family members are hardly ever informed, as required by both Eritrean and international law. This enables the commission of the numerous cases of enforced disappearance and rampant torture. These acts are ongoing and constitute crimes against humanity. The Commission also documented various acts of sexual and gender-based violence. In military training camps and in the army, some young women are also used as slaves to perform domestic duties and are also raped. Rape is also committed in detention facilities by officials and guards, not only against a significant number of women, but also against men. While some forms of torture are used against both men and women, other forms are gender-specific, such as the beating of pregnant women in military training camps or in the army to induce abortion. Instances of sexual violence against men were also documented by the Commission, including sexual torture done intentionally to ensure that these men are no longer able to reproduce. The Commission found that the crimes it documented has been committed primarily, directly or indirectly, by state and ruling party officials, military commanders, and members of the National Security Office. The Commission has identified alleged perpetrators and has compiled files on those individuals to assist future accountability mechanisms. The Commission noted no material changes with the potential of impacting positively on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. There is still no constitution, no parliament where laws are discussed, enacted, and where questions of national importance are debated. The indefinite national service persists with its adverse impact on individual rights. There are no free press and no NGOs except for government-sponsored ones. The population lives in fear and the government still controls their daily lives, making the enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by Eritreans a remote possibility. In Eritrea, the rule of law is not supreme. The government and its agents must be subject to the law. People who have their rights breached must have access to a properly constituted, independent court, which is staffed by professional judges who are not frightened of retribution. Ordinary people should not fear using the justice system because of arrests, detention, or risked disappearance in the country's jails for doing so. The Commission has asked on several occasions to visit the country and have unhindered access to sites and locations to gather information and conduct investigations, but was denied such an opportunity by the government of Eritrea. The Commission's findings are based on detailed statements and information from over 833 individuals in over 13 countries, the overwhelming majority of whom have personally suffered human rights violations in Eritrea. We have been able to substantially corroborate the information provided by these witnesses. We also selected and contacted a sample of 500 individuals who wrote to us saying that our first report was inaccurate and read with care the written submissions of thousands more, all of which seem to be part of a pro-government campaign. The Commission gave due regard to these submissions. The Commission has concluded that the government of Eritrea has neither the political will nor the institutional capacity to prosecute the crimes we have documented. The Commission therefore recommended that the UN Security Council refer the situation of Eritrea to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and that the African Union establish an accountability mechanism. The Commission has also asked Member States to prosecute or extradite suspects on their territories, and that the Security Council imposes travel bans and frees the assets of individuals suspected of crimes against humanity. the preamble of the ICC statute states that crimes that shock the conscience of humanity, such as those we have documented in our report, threaten the peace, security, and well-being of the world. Therefore, they must not go unpunished. We need collectively to bring the perpetrators of these crimes to justice, not only for the sake of the countless number of Eritrean victims, but to demonstrate that such behavior is simply unacceptable anywhere in the world today. My plea to you, Excellencies, on behalf of the 3 members of the former Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea, Mike Smith, Victor Danko, and myself, is for you to pay heed to the voices of victims of crimes against humanity in Eritrea. This was the report I read on behalf of the commissioners of the former Commission of Inquiry. I will now address you as the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. Distinguished delegates, let me now turn to my mandate as Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. I am honored to brief you for the 4th time in this capacity. When extending my mandate in Resolution 32/24, the Human Rights Council requested me to follow up on the implementation of the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry in its report, which I mentioned earlier, A/HRC/32/47. I want to focus on several recommendations, some of which I have already noted earlier. The Commission recommended that the African Union establish an accountability mechanism under the aegis of the African Union and supported by the international community to investigate, prosecute, and try individuals reasonably believed to have committed crimes against humanity. During the coming year, I intend to focus on the concrete measures that should be taken to ensure accountability for crimes identified in the report of the Commission. Plans are still in their preliminary stages. I will report back during the next session. The Commission recommended that Member States and international organizations keep Eritrea under scrutiny until consistent and tangible progress regarding the human rights situation is evident, and ensure the centrality of human rights in all its engagement with the state. Several foreign delegations, journalists, and others have recently been invited to visit Eritrea and have painted a favorable picture of the country. Some of these signs of increasing engagement from Eritrea with the international community, including with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, have been duly acknowledged, both by the Commission and by the Special Rapporteur, myself, elsewhere. However, we have been mandated by the Human Rights Council to investigate systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations that generally take place in isolated locations, behind closed doors, in places where casual visitors, journalists, and regrettably diplomats do not have access, including in places of detention. Regrettably, we have not noted any substantial change regarding the human rights situation in those locations and generally in the country. Since the beginning, the government of Eritrea has refused to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur, as well as with the Commission, as I mentioned earlier. It has rejected findings of wide-ranging and gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity that continue to be committed to date. Without recognition of the serious situation, it is unclear how the government will address the documented violations. Denial is not a good strategy. Denial of human rights violations doesn't allow for proper addressing those violations in the best cooperative manner. I hope that the strengthened links with Eritrea will offer space for member states and an international organization, including the UN agencies and OHCHR, to discuss the Commission's finding and assist the government to devise strategies on how to respect its obligations under international law. It is my considered view that following the publication in June of the findings of the UN-mandated Commission of Inquiry, business as usual is no longer an option. Eritrea's international partners should ensure their engagement with the government contributes to putting an end to ongoing violations and foster a marked improvement on the human rights situation of Eritrean children, women and men. The Commission recommended that Member States provide Eritrean nationals seeking protection with refugee status in accordance with the provision of international law governing asylum and the Convention relating to the status of refugees, and to respect the principle of non-refoulement. Since the beginning of 2016, Eritrean asylum seekers continue to constitute one of the largest African nationalities arriving in Europe. As of July 2016, Eritreans ranked 8th in the number of asylum applicants in Europe and 2nd among African countries. I note that the overall recognition rate of Eritrean asylum seekers in Europe remains considerable. Between January and April 2016, it stood at over 90%, in those European countries that receive the largest number of Eritrean asylum applications. However, I'm very concerned about increasing reports of Eritreans being deported from third countries back to Eritrea in a context where their situation upon return is not adequately monitored. The findings of the Commission underscore that it is not safe to forcibly return those who have left Eritrea. The Commission, in its first report, documented that individuals forcibly repatriated, with a few exceptions, have been arrested, detained, and subjected to ill treatment and torture. In this context, I was pleased to note the recent decision by the UK Upper Tribunal in a country information and guidance case on Eritrea, which found that failed Eritrean asylum seekers or of approaching draft age who had left illegally were likely to be perceived on return to Eritrea as a draft evader or deserter from national service and subjected to national service, which would thus make them face a real risk of persecution or serious harm by virtue of such service constituting forced labour, contrary to Article 4, Paragraph 2 and Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. I appeal to Member States to grant Eritreans access to their territory and asylum procedures. I strongly reiterate my call to protect all asylum seekers from refoulement and to refrain from any forced repatriation. Distinguished delegates, let me briefly lay out how I intend to implement my mandate with a view to giving effect to the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry over the next few months. I will identify opportunities to promote the implementation of recommendations and advocate for taking them forward with those engaging directly with the government of Eritrea, namely Member States with a presence in the country, the United Nations country team, and broader UN system, including OHCHR. I will track the progress of this engagement and report back to the Human Rights Council. I intend to continue my cooperation with other human rights mandates of the Human Rights Councils. I will follow up closely Eritrea's efforts to implement the recommendations made during the second Universal Periodic Review. I will continue updating the international community on any changes of the human rights situation in Eritrea and hope to be able to highlight concrete improvements for the people on the ground in my upcoming reports to the Human Rights Council. Last but not least, I will take up any reprisals against those that have cooperated with the Commission or with my mandate as Special Rapporteur and ensure that there is appropriate follow-up by relevant mechanisms. The Commission has recommended that the General Assembly put the human rights situation in Eritrea on its agenda. I hope this august body will adopt a resolution with a view to submitting the report of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea to the Security Council for a possible referral to the on the human rights situation in Eritrea to the International Criminal Court. While working towards ensuring accountability of those responsible for serious human rights violations, I hope engagement with the government of Eritrea will help to make a difference in the lives of the uncounted victims and the people of Eritrea, while reiterating the Commission of Inquiry's findings no longer allow for business as usual. I hope the voices of the numerous victims that the Commission, as well as the Special Rapporteur, strive to document do not go unheard. There are high expectations that the international community will listen to their calls for justice. I recall one of those who had the courage to share his story with us. A young man who was clearly emotionally scarred by his experience of enslavement in the military, national service, repeated instances of arbitrary arrest and imprisonment, and the pain of having been separated from his family for too long. After describing in detail the harrowing human rights violations he had been subjected to, we asked at the end of the interview if he would want to add anything. He responded that he wanted us to tell the world what was going on in Eritrea, so that the international community would do something to bring justice to the people of Eritrea and to bring an end to the human rights violations there. Today, I ask you to listen to his plea. To conclude, I would want to reiterate and reassure the government of Eritrea, as well as member states, that as Special Rapporteur, I remain open for meaningful and constructive dialogue about all human rights in Eritrea, and which has been my position right from the beginning. And I'm available to visit the country prior to my written report to the Human Rights Council in 2017, in June 2017. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Ms. Keetharuth for her statement, and now I shall give the floor to those delegations wishing to ask questions or make comments. Firstly, Venezuela, on behalf of the non-aligned. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have the honor of addressing you on behalf of the NAM. In the Margaret Island Summit, the importance was highlighted of protecting human rights and promoting human rights and fundamental liberties for all, a right universally recognized in the United Nations Charter and other human rights instruments, as well as international law. All rights, including the right to development, are inalienable and indivisible. And the question of human rights in that context should be dealt with in a positive way without any controversy and on the basis of dialogue in full equality and respect for the sovereignty, national sovereignty of countries on the basis of transparency, universality, and the neutrality, political neutrality, and special features of each and every country. We are aware of and we condemn human rights violations in any situation which might prevent full enjoyment of human rights and violence. In accordance with our position, in principle, we would like to emphasize the role taken by the Human Rights Council, which is a subsidiary of the United Nations General Assembly, and which is entrusted with the task of looking at the situations in all countries on the basis of universality and constructive dialogue. Our government expresses its grave concern over this. Thank you. I thank Venezuela on behalf of the non-aligned. I now give the floor to the delegation of Eritrea.
Superior.
Microphone for Eritrea, please.
My apologies. Excellencies, Eritrea sees little value in entering into a polemic with a clearly biased special rapporteur. We prefer an altogether different and positive approach. We wish to explain our situation, our modest achievements, our challenges, our programs, our responsibility and commitment, emphasize the importance of solidarity, and express readiness for constructive engagement and cooperation. We wish to remind this important gathering that the Commission of Inquiry does not exist. Its mandate was terminated at the 31st session of the Human Rights Council last July in Geneva. The Council had considered its report, took note of it, and decided to reject its key recommendations, which included astonishingly sending yet another African country, Eritrea, to the International Criminal Court, which is not only unwarranted for Eritrea, but is a gross insult to Africa, which has made its firm views on the institution very clear. Eritrea strongly believes that the most appropriate forum for the discussion of human rights on the basis of universality and of equality is the Human Rights Council. Like most UN member states and almost all developing nations, we oppose double standards, selective, politically motivated, country-specific approaches that reject dialogue and cooperation in favor of confrontation and escalation. If it weren't for this short-sighted and ultimately counterproductive approach, whose first casualty is human rights, Eritrea would not be on the agenda today. Excellencies, Eritrea, as it will keep stressing, is a nation born in the struggle for human rights. Its number one priority remains ensuring the welfare and dignity of its people. Eritrea is a safe, peaceful, stable nation with remarkable harmony amongst its diverse population. Its evolving political system is based on citizenship. It seeks to foster the broadest participation of its citizens at home and abroad, at all levels and in all affairs of the nation. It's working to build a justice system based on a body of laws, including the supreme law of the land, at the center of which is broad popular participation, including equitable participation of women in the form of locally elected community courts. Eritrea is committed to development, which supports the material, social, and cultural aspirations of the people, and in particular the youth. After years of difficulty, the basis for broad-based growth is being laid lesson by lesson, brick by brick, and institution by institution. As many who have partnered with Eritrea will confirm, it makes judicious and effective use of available resources. Eritrea is an independent, constructive, active, and consciously modest regional and global actor. We're strong believers in solidarity between nations and peoples, as well as in genuine and mutually beneficial partnerships. We favor dialogue, engagement, and cooperation. Unfortunately, the policy of seeking to isolate and undermine Eritrea has limited our role. It has also deprived the Horn of Africa of the positive contribution we would have been able to make. Excellencies, national ownership and national responsibility are the pillars of Eritrean approach to nation building. We first look to ourselves, mobilize our own human and financial resources, and only then seek friends and partners. This approach also applies to the important issue of human rights. Despite hostility and challenge, Eritrea is working steadfastly to advance the political, civic, economic, social, and cultural rights of its people. The length and quality of life of Eritreans has improved. We are providing free and universal education. Strides have been made in health. Women's and children's rights are protected. The policies of citizenship, unity in diversity, and prioritizing disadvantaged areas and sections of the population have strengthened national cohesion and solidarity. Eritreans also enjoy many civic and political rights and have access to information. Yet, Eritrea, as it is first to stress, our achievements are modest, fall far short of our aspirations, and we believe we have a long way to go. We are never complacent. We are determined to achieve the sustainable development goals ahead of schedule, build a nation worthy of the heavy sacrifices made to bring it to existence, and contribute to a peaceful, cooperative, and integrated Horn of Africa region. As Eritrea carries on with its national agenda, it welcomes and encourages solidarity and partnerships. It's keen to shoulder its international obligations in the areas of peace, development, and human rights. It's a willing and proud participant in the universal review process. It's cooperating effectively with the United Nations, UN human rights bodies, and other partners to implement the recommendations it has accepted. It's critical but also effective participant in the fight against human trafficking and for effective solutions for irregular migration. Excellencies, you're well aware that over 6 decades, Eritrea has been treated most unfairly by the United Nations and the international system. The continued occupation of our sovereign territory has been met with deafening silence and detrimental inaction. Sanctions against Eritrea continue, although everyone agrees that there is no case and no justification for it. Eritrea is singled out for attacks on human rights when the grossest violations of others are glossed over. Yet, Eritrea does not seek favored treatment. It seeks fairness. It asks for a level playing field. More importantly, it encourages mutual solidarity and support. I thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegation of Eritrea for that statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Myanmar.
Madam Chair, the delegation of Myanmar has carefully followed the oral updates of the Special Rapporteur on Eritrea and would like to make the following remarks. 1. The efforts in promotion and protection of human rights should be based on cooperation and genuine dialogue. 2. My delegation believes that political and social stability is a key for overall development of the country. 3. We remain confident that the UPR mechanism provides the most appropriate frameworks to enhance the international cooperation in the field of human rights where all states are treated on an equal footing. 4. And finally, Madam Chair, along these lines, we encourage the concerned country to continue its engagement with the international community in implementing accepted UPR recommendations. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegation of Myanmar, and I now give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Special Rapporteur, we welcome your oral update and want to reiterate our appreciation for your work and the work of the Commission of Inquiry. Your mandate enjoys our full support. We reiterate our calls for the government of Eritrea to cooperate fully with you and facilitate access for you to Eritrea. The European Union remains very concerned about the human rights situation in Eritrea and takes note of the latest report by the Commission of Inquiry, which noted that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea. We take due note of some recent positive developments. For instance, we commend Eritrea for moving away from the death penalty and encourage it to maintain a moratorium on execution. In this vein, we commend the 2014 support by Eritrea for the General Assembly resolution on death penalty. Furthermore, we welcome the fact that an OHCHR delegation undertook another working level visit to Eritrea. We note that the delegation was able to visit community court, the Sembel prison, and a rehabilitation center. We hope that this is a step towards full cooperation on human rights with the international community and with all UN bodies. We also note that the Commission's recommendation, that member states should increase attention to and, if feasible, increase resources to improve the situation of human rights in Eritrea and strengthen engagement with the government. Building on our recommendation, we agree that substantial improvement in the human rights situation and the provision of accountability of crime and human rights violations are needed and require legal and institutional reform. We also agree that Eritrea needs to take forward substantial reforms that will provide a constitutional framework, improve rule of law, grant access to detention center and indefinite national service, and address any concern around forced labor. We would like to ask you about UPR recommendation and how.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of the European Union. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Djibouti. Ambassador Behalen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the outset, Djibouti warmly welcomes Madam Sheila Keetharuth and commends the impressive work done, both as Special Rapporteur and as a member of the Commission of Inquiry on Eritrea. We further thank you for the information just shared with the committee today. Your update just confirms and corroborates the very dire human rights situation prevailing in Eritrea, as documented in your successive reports, both to the Human Rights Council and to the Third Committee, as well as the COI report and oral updates. We condemn the systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations in Eritrea in a climate of generalized impunity. We deeply regret the continued refusal by the government of Eritrea to cooperate with the Commission of Inquiry and the Special Rapporteur, including the lack of access to the country. Despite major hurdles, the Commission of Inquiry has completed its work in a transparent, impartial, and consultative manner. Madam Special Rapporteur, you have been entrusted with the very important task of following up on the implementation of the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry. What actions, in your view, can the relevant organs of the United Nations take to give effect to those recommendations? The Commission concluded that a regional mechanism could be created to address accountability in Eritrea. Could you elaborate on that? The Commission of Inquiry has generated a lot of expectations, and the HRC resolution on Eritrea requests the Secretary General to provide the Special Rapporteur with all information and resources necessary to fulfill your mandate. Do you have enough resources to fulfill your mandate? Thirdly and lastly, what actions have you taken to inquire about the remaining 13 Djibouti prisoners of war who continue to be held incommunicado in Eritrean prisons since 2008? Thank you, Madam President.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegation of Djibouti for that statement, Ambassador Tuvali, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of the USA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States thanks the Special Rapporteur for her continued work on the human rights situation in Eritrea, both in her role as Special Rapporteur and as a member of the Commission of Inquiry. With Eritreans fleeing their country each month, we must continue to look for ways to improve the country's dire human rights situation. We welcome the government of Eritrea's permission for OHCHR to visit the country in the past year and its stated intention to adopt several recommendations of the Universal Periodic Review. We strongly encourage the government to respond positively to the UN mandate holders who have requested a visit, including the Special Rapporteur. The United States is concerned by reports that the government of Eritrea has arbitrarily detained journalists, political opposition members, and others trying to express their opinions or who call for democratic reforms. Reports that the government has imposed severe restrictions on exercise of the freedom of religion or belief and subjected members of non-authorized religions to arbitrary detention are very troubling. The United States strongly encourages all countries, including Eritrea, to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur's efforts to promote human rights in Eritrea. Special Rapporteur, you have encouraged the international community to advocate national service reforms in Eritrea. The United States believes that ending indefinite conscription would be one of the most positive signals the government of Eritrea could send. What is the status of the government's commitment to limit the duration of national service to 18 months, develop an independent and transparent judiciary, and release persons who have been arbitrarily detained? And how can the international community best press the government to implement its constitution, hold national elections, and honor those commitments? Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of the U.S., and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We align ourselves with the statements delivered by the delegation of Venezuela on behalf of the non-aligned movement. The pursuit of human rights is an ideal that is shared by all. In addressing issues of the promotion and protection of human rights, we must always be cognizant of the fact that no country has achieved the status of the perfect realization of human rights for its people. Consequently, none has the moral authority to condemn the human rights challenges faced by another, or belittle a country's efforts at promoting the human rights of its citizens. When one country or a group of countries takes on the mantle of human rights prefect, this achieves nothing more than the polarization of the debate and reduces the consideration of this important issue to mere political. As such, Zimbabwe once again restates its position against country mandates as they promote double standards and seek to institutionalize the selective treatment of countries. Any consideration of human rights must be done in a manner that is even-handed, impartial, and that accords each state the primal role in the promotion and protection of the rights of its citizens. We would like to recall that when we established the Human Rights Council through Resolution 60/251, we agreed that it would be guided by the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, non-selectivity, constructive dialogue, and cooperation. The creation of a country mandate without the concurrence of the affected country runs counter to the creation of an environment that allows for constructive dialogue and cooperation. Furthermore, it complicates the work of the mandate holders and undermines the balance of their reports. We therefore reiterate our conviction that the Universal Periodic Review remains the best forum for all states to have their efforts towards the promotion and protection of human rights reviewed impartially and on an equal footing.
I'd like to thank the distinguished delegation of Zimbabwe for that statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Germany, the Vice Chair of this third committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to extend our thanks to the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea for engaging with the third committee in an interactive dialogue, and want to reiterate our appreciation for your work and the work of the Commission of Inquiry. Germany takes due note of the recent developments in Eritrea. Accordingly, we commend the willingness of the government of Eritrea to work together with the OHCHR, and that a delegation of the OHCHR undertook a working-level visit to the country. We urge the government of Eritrea to build on this. We also encourage the government of Eritrea to continue the way of cooperation with UNDP and the EU in implementing the UPR recommendations. Nonetheless, considering that the present report does not find any improvements with respect to the most critical human rights violations committed since 1991, and that the country is only selectively cooperating with UN bodies, we remain seriously concerned about the human rights situation in Eritrea. Germany therefore believes that the nature of this report merits a considerate and constructive response by the government of Eritrea. Building on your recommendations and your findings, we agree that substantial improvements in the human rights situations, as well as an accountable constitutional system founded on the rule of law, require strong political will, as well as effective legal and institutional reforms. Germany therefore urges the government to take serious, concrete and visible steps to implement these reforms and to hold these persons accountable who are responsible for the crimes that have and continue to be committed.
I'd like to thank the distinguished delegation of Germany, Vice Chair of this committee, for these words, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of the United Arab Emirates. You have the floor.
Madam Chairperson, we have studied the statement made by the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Eritrea. Our delegation would like to express, says the Speaker, welcome the positive cooperation between the UN and Eritrea to promote human rights therein. We should take into consideration the positive steps taken by Eritrea, including its acceptance of 92 recommendations during the UPR of Human Rights Council and establishing a machinery to implement these recommendations and achieve an agreement with the UN to expedite the implementation of the UPR recommendations and other human rights obligations. We also welcome Eritrea's cooperation with the Human Rights Commissioner, as well as its active cooperation with the UNODC. These achievements represent progress that make the obligation of Eritrea firm in promotion of human rights. We are confident that it will continue its positive cooperation with the UN on this field. Thank you.
I should like to thank the delegation of the United Arab Emirates, and I give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Ecuador. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My delegation joins with a statement made by Venezuela on behalf of the non-aligned movement. We wish to state once again our position of full support for the work and institutional nature of the Human Rights Council, the body which has a remit to scrutinize the human rights situation, and we regret the fact that there is still a proliferation of practices which are created with political ends and obeying double standards, violating the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity. We believe that these are of a political nature and don't promote or protect human rights. Quite the opposite. They undermine interstate relationships, constructive dialogue, international cooperation, and those carefully crafted mechanisms such as the Universal Periodic Review, which Ecuador fully supports, and which we shall continue to defend, are the true instruments. Thank you. I should like to thank the distinguished delegation of Ecuador, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Ethiopia. The Director General of the Organization for International Affairs of the Foreign Ministry, you have the floor. Microphone, please. Ethiopia has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. My delegation would like to appreciate the Special Rapporteur for her oral update in her capacity as a member of the former Inquiry Commission on Eritrea, as well as in her capacity as a Special Rapporteur. We appreciate her courageous commitment and decisiveness in accounting those crimes committed against humanity in Eritrea. We wish her further success in discharging her responsibility to follow up the implementation of the recommendations of the Inquiry Commission. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, and then I give the floor to the distinguished delegation of China.
Madam Chair, China takes note of the presentation by Mrs. Keetharuth. China's position on country-specific mandates is crystal clear. We oppose forcing through the establishment of a country-specific mandate without the consent of the country concerned, and we believe imposing an inquiry mechanism from outside is neither conducive to dialogue aimed at solving problems, nor to the promotion and protection of human rights. Eritrea made steady progress in human rights in recent years, with particularly remarkable results in economic, social, and cultural rights, as it's one of 8 African countries to have achieved the MDGs. Eritrea actively cooperated with UN human rights bodies, participated in 2 cycles of UPR, and accepted 92 recommendations in the UPR reports. It signed an agreement with the United Nations on the implementation of these recommendations and accelerated its implementation efforts. We call upon the international community to be objective when looking at the difficulties and challenges facing Eritrea as a developing country in its efforts to promote and protect the human rights of the citizens. We call upon the international community to make a fair assessment of the progress made by Eritrea in this regard and abandon the practices of exerting pressure and naming and shaming. The international community should engage in constructive dialogue and provide Eritrea with more technical assistance and capacity building support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Agradezco la intervención. I should like to thank the distinguished delegation for these words, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Norway.
Thank you. Norway thanks the Special Rapporteur for her efforts, both in her capacity as Special Rapporteur and as member of the former Commission of Inquiry. As a long-standing friend of Eritrea and its people, we remain deeply concerned by the reports of grave human rights violation and lack of accountability for crimes committed. Norway is a co-sponsor of the UN resolutions on the human rights situation in Eritrea, and we emphasize the need for proper follow-up of these resolutions. We take note of the conclusion of the COI report that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity have been committed in Eritrea. We reiterate our call on the government to enact the 1997 Constitution, to translate words into action by observing and respecting universal human rights and complying with international obligations in this respect. We strongly encourage the government of Eritrea to engage with the international community and UN bodies to address the human rights situation. In particular, we fully support the request of the Human Rights Council for the Office of the High Commissioner to continue to strengthen its engagement in Eritrea. We also encourage the government of Eritrea to consider inviting the OHCHR to establish an office inside the country. We understand that Eritrea has extended invitations to several thematic special rapporteurs. We urge the government to consider extending invitation to special rapporteurs working on civil and political rights as well. Norway is committed to strengthening our own engagement with the government of Eritrea, including support for the implementation of the accepted Universal Periodic Review recommendation. A question to the Special Rapporteur: what, in your opinion, would be the best starting point for the government to strengthen its human rights implementation? Thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación. I should like to thank the delegation of Norway, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Cuba. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Cuba favors a spirit of cooperation and dialogue in promoting all human rights in all countries throughout the world. Therefore, we believe that it is the Universal Periodic Review carried out by the Human Rights Council which can ensure this. Taking into account this, Cuba does not foster procedures, country-specific procedures, which are all aimed at countries in the south. We urge the creation of a new opportunity for cooperation that can foster the direct involvement of regional and sub-regional organizations, African ones, in questions which are of concern and in seeking effective solutions, including the Eritrean authorities, dealing with their concerns and helping the Eritrean people as a purpose. Thank you. I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of Cuba, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Belarus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Belarus would like to join with the statement made already, and once again state that the country-related mandates should not be artificial barriers to a positive dialogue among states. We are convinced that the country subjects and discussions in the UN should not strengthen confrontation, and we appreciate the activities of the Eritrea and the special procedures involved and the visit of the mission to Eritrea. We also welcome the efforts of Eritrea on the recommendations of the Universal Declaration, the United Nations bodies in their carrying out of their mandates, and we feel that this is one of the basic instruments which enables us to consider the situation with regard to human rights without any prejudicial attitudes. And we feel that a dialogue with Eritrea should be based without any pressure on the part of the country mandate. Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of Belarus, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The delegations of Nicaragua and Bolivia are concerned that once again this UN body is lending itself to follow the intention of certain member states to carry out reports on developing countries with the purposes of political pressure being exerted and running counter to principles of universality and objectivity. Our delegations wish to reiterate their position on these reports and resolutions on the situation of human rights, which are country-specific, which come every year to the third committee, and we wish once again to reject this policy leading to selectivity and politicization of human rights. For us, dialogue and cooperation inter parties is the way of improving any situation without resorting to foreign action or external pressure, and even less to conditioning or politicizing the human rights situation. We believe that the body dealing for human rights in all countries must be the Human Rights Council, and therefore there is the Universal Periodic Review. This is the instrument that is suitable for this, based on objectivity, impartiality, is fostering and rendering more sound human rights by means of a constructive dialogue that can involve all countries on an equal footing. Thank you. I should like to thank the distinguished delegation of the plurinational state of Bolivia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of the UK.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United Kingdom would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for her work and the update on the Commission of Inquiry report on Eritrea to the General Assembly. The UK shares the concerns highlighted in the Special Rapporteur's update to the General Assembly. The failure by the government of Eritrea to allow its people their full political, economic and social rights is deeply concerning, and a major push factor leading Eritreans to undertake the dangerous journey through neighbouring countries and then across the Mediterranean into Europe. Action must be taken to tackle human rights violations and the overall lack of economic opportunity if the flow of people risking their lives is to be stemmed. The UK is using its engagement with Eritrea to make clear the tangible improvements in Eritrea's human rights record we want to see, including amending its indefinite national service requirements, fully implementing its own constitution, and cooperating with international human rights bodies. We welcome the steps that Eritrea has taken in this direction by signing a programme document with the UN in May this year, and their renewed cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We hope they will build upon these early steps through further engagement with the international community. We would welcome the Special Rapporteur's thoughts on how the international community can assist the government of Eritrea to fully implement their proposed revised constitution and improve the human rights situation in the country. The UK reaffirms its disappointment that the government of Eritrea continues to reject the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Eritrea and to deny her access to the country. We call on the government to honour its international human rights obligations and to cooperate fully with the whole UN human rights system, including the Special Rapporteur. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I should like to thank the UK for that statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bangladesh challenged itself with the statement made by Venezuela on behalf of NAM. Madam Chair, let me reiterate our firm conviction that human rights are indivisible, mutually reinforcing. Our position on human rights issues is based on the principle of universality, non-selectivity, impartiality, and objectivity. In line with the NAM principle position, we do not support country-specific resolutions, as these resolutions, we believe, do not contribute to the improvement of the overall human rights situation of those countries and do not take into account the different levels of their development, national situation, religious background, culture, and challenges. Madam Chair, we took note of the various measures taken by the Eritrea government to protect and promote human rights in Eritrea. We commend the engagement of the government of Eritrea with various countries and organizations, including United Nations, African Union, and European Union. We have noted with appreciation the commitment of Eritrea to cooperate with Human Rights Council and the Office of the Human Rights Office of the Commission of Human Rights with a view to consolidating the human rights of its citizens. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Agradezco la delegación. I should like to thank the delegation of Bangladesh, and I give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Switzerland. Madam Chair, Switzerland thanks the Special Rapporteur for the work done and the commitment displayed. The account of the Special Rapporteurs and the report of the Commission of Inquiry submitted during the 31st and 32nd Human Rights Council paint an alarming picture of the human rights situation in Eritrea. Switzerland is concerned at the situation and calls on the government of Eritrea to take specific and immediate action to put an end to the serious violations of human rights in the country. Switzerland wishes here to put on record its strong support for the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, which are an important tool in order to bring about the real improvement of the situation in human rights in the countries concerned. We would say here that it is necessary for the Special Rapporteur to have unrestricted access to the country so that the mandate can be fully exercised. Madam Special Rapporteur, in the absence of country access, how are you planning the follow-up of the implementation of the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry? How can other member states support you as you carry out your mandate? During the last Universal Periodic Review, Eritrea agreed to certain recommendations and made indications of relative openness regarding the follow-up of their implementation. Madam, have you any intention of taking specific action in this context here? Thank you. I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of Switzerland, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like once again to reassert the principle of position of the Russian Federation on the lack of productivity of activities on human rights bodies and making such studies. This is not in keeping with objectivity and lack of prejudice, and which are inherent in the work of United Nations human rights bodies. And there's no justification in the human rights sphere, and there is no veracity in the description given of the situation in the field. We need to have a calm dialogue and close cooperation. We believe that the special procedure of the Universal Procedural Review is the type of format which would enable us to have a constructive discussion of the situation with regard to human rights in countries and to help them to carry out the obligations they took upon themselves in this sphere. We are convinced that the international community will encourage such an aspiration on the part of countries in having a dialogue in dealing with these problems instead of isolating them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I should like to thank the delegation of the Russian Federation, and now give the floor for the last six comments to Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We take this opportunity to reaffirm our position that the best approach to address human rights concerns is through constructive engagement based on the principles of impartiality, transparency, objectivity, and non-selectivity. Pakistan strongly believes that states have the primary responsibility for the promotion and protection of the human rights of their citizens in accordance with their international obligations. Any external interference through country-specific mandates is counterproductive. Madam Chair, we welcome Eritrea's commitment to fulfill its international obligations as reflected through its participation in the UPR process, and hope that the government of Eritrea will continue on this constructive path. I thank you.
I'd like to thank Pakistan for those words, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Burundi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my delegation would like to endorse the statement which was made by Venezuela on behalf of the non-aligned movement. The Burundi delegation has taken due note of the report submitted by the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Eritrea, and would like now to reiterate its position in principle to oppose the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry, which deals specifically with a given country, as being counterproductive. Burundi is also concerned about the tend towards using human rights for political purposes, something which harms the cooperation as a principle, an essential one, to promote and protect effectively human rights, universally recognized ones, in accordance with the United Nations Charter. My delegation believes that the United Nations has sufficient machinery to look at the situation regarding human rights everywhere. And we are referring here to the periodic review, the Universal Periodic Review, which is much more constructive and much more likely to achieve tangible results in Eritrea and elsewhere. The Human Rights Council should refrain from any politicization and try to be objective and to avoid thereby any situation of confrontation which does not help any country to develop. Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegate of Burundi, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My delegation aligns itself with the statement made by Venezuela on behalf of non-aligned movement. The Islamic Republic of Iran once again underlines its principled position concerning the reports presented by the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Eritrea, that the duplicative practice of considering country-specific situation in the Third Committee and exploitation of this platform for political ends is in breach of the principles of universality, non-selectivity, objectivity, and non-interference in addressing human rights issues, and undermines cooperation and dialogue among states as the essential requirements for promotion and protection of all universally recognized human rights. We reiterate our conviction that the UPR mechanism is the right venue for reviewing the human rights situation in all member states on an equal basis with full participation of the concerned governments. I thank you very much.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Egypt.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Egypt aligns itself with the statement made by the non-aligned movement delivered by the delegation of Venezuela. At their summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, the heads of state and government of NAM emphasized the role of the Human Rights Council as the United Nations body responsible for considering human rights situations in all countries. They also expressed deep concern over the continued practice of selective adoption of country-specific resolutions in the Third Committee. That position was reiterated once again during the last NAM summit held in Margarita, Venezuela in September of this year, during which the heads of state and government of NAM reaffirmed their deep concern over the continuation and the proliferation of the practice of selective adoption of country-specific resolutions in the Third Committee, as well as the Human Rights Council. In this regard, they noted that such resolutions are a tool that exploit human rights for political purposes and breach the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity in addressing human rights issues. They also noted that such practices undermine cooperation as the essential principle to effectively promote and protect all universally recognized human rights for all, in accordance with the United Nations Charter and international law provisions. In this regard, the movement stressed that the Universal Periodic Review of the Human Rights Council was the main intergovernmental cooperative mechanism to review human rights issues at the national level in all countries without distinction, and had been established to eliminate selectivity, politicization, and double standards. Egypt animately believes that the human rights and fundamental freedoms should be addressed through a cooperative and non-confrontational approach based on enhancing national capacities of states to implement their international obligations nationally and without interference. It is against this backdrop that Egypt rejects all country-specific mandates as a general principle, and thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished delegation of Egypt for those words. And Venezuela now has the floor, one of the last two speakers. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Regarding the report on the human rights situation in Eritrea, Venezuela says once again that it is not in favor of special procedures which have not been coordinated with the country involved. And we therefore once again reject selectivity in the treatment of human rights issues with political purposes and the creation of any instrument, report or resolution which is country-specific based on politically motivated decisions. The use of human rights for political aims is a violation of the principles and purposes of the UN Charter. The practice of reports and committees of inquiry, which are politically twisted for specific country purposes, violates the principles of objectivity, impartiality, etc., which should be used in addressing human rights themes. We welcome the positive steps regarding the Human Rights Council. Their credibility is undermined by this sort of approach. Human rights should be looked at in the framework of the Universal Periodic Review. This is the par excellence instrument on the basis, again, of dialogue and agreement with countries. Thank you very much. I should like to thank the delegation of Venezuela, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Eritrea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish, on behalf of Eritrea, to thank the non-aligned movement, its chair, Venezuela, and all those countries that spoke on the basis of principle. Eritrea appreciates your solidarity and support. To those who made unsubstantiated allegations and unfair accusations against Eritrea, I would like to say, please review your views, adjust your views, and engage in Eritrea in positive and constructive cooperation. And please stop double standards in dealing with the issues of human rights. I have a simple comment for Ethiopia, which should be the last country to speak about human rights. Ethiopia should be hiding its head here, not speaking about human rights violations in Eritrea. This is a country that is committing gross violations of human rights, committing crimes against humanity, has massacred thousands of people, has imprisoned tens of thousands. This is a country where making a simple sign of protest like this X is considered a crime, where watching independent media stations and accessing Facebook is punishable by 5 years imprisonment. This is a country that has declared martial law, that is being ruled by a command post, and it's sad that this forum is discussing Eritrea and not Ethiopia. I feel sad to make these comments, but I feel obliged to make them just to expose the double standards that this forum is dealing with. But more importantly, I would like to reaffirm and uphold the position of NAM. Thank you.
Agradezco la delegación. I should like to thank the delegation of Eritrea for that statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Ethiopia.
The floor to exercise my right of reply to what the representative of Eritrea said. It must be clear to this august body that the mayhem that happened in recent times in my country is as a result of the policy followed by Eritrea. Eritrea continues to train, organize, and deploy terrorists in my country as well as in the region. Eritrea is a country committed to destabilize the Horn, the region, now and then. This august body must be clear that the agenda, what we have in front of us, is crimes against humanity committed in Eritrea by the Eritrean government itself. The agenda is not Ethiopia, is not XYZ. We wish to hear the progress made by Eritrea. Thank you very much.
I should like to thank the delegation of Ethiopia for those words, and I now give the floor to Madam Keetharuth for some brief conclusions.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your remarks. I take it very, very seriously, and in the implementation of my mandate, I will certainly be looking at all the comments you've made and how I can improve the delivery on my mandate with regards to what you've said. I'd like to welcome the engagement which I have heard and which I have seen, many expressed that there is positive engagement that Eritrea has made with the UN, with the international community as a whole. I really believe that any engagement should lead to tangible improvements for the people of Eritrea, many of whom I have spoken when I've talked to many of the victims. There should be respect for human rights in the engagement that we are talking about. There should also be very concrete and time-bound measures. I'm thinking, for example, like why not open prison doors? There are people who've been in incommunicado detention for the past 15 years. Building trust is not only with the international community. Building trust is with the people inside Eritrea itself. And I believe this is a central element of any engagement. There should also be, we've talked about the issue of forced laborers. I've talked about prison doors which need to be open, forced labor issues, and the national service. There has been promises for 18 months, etc. We would like to see more concrete measures where people are able to have a choice with what they do in their own lives. And for example, education, which is being said is a very important development in Eritrea, shouldn't be linked with the national service. For example, there are intricate links between the violations that I have talked about and development also, and enjoyment of economic, social and cultural rights. I totally agree, and I'm in total agreement that development is a very important aspect for all of us. I come from a developing country and I understand very much this aspect. But development does not give us a license to violate the rights of our own people. So this is a very important. While ensuring that there is development, one cannot violate rights. The other aspect I would like to say is that any engagement and with different bodies at the UN and elsewhere should also make sure that that impunity is ended. We absolutely need to ensure that those who have perpetrated human rights violations are in fact taken, do not go about scot-free. It is important. This is one important message that I have for the international community. Quickly, I'm not going to take long, Madam Chair, I understand. Just to say that I have detailed some of the actions I will take to give effect to the recommendations of the Commission in my report already, which is available. So I won't go into the details of that. And also, while we do talk about opening up to other UN bodies, this shouldn't be selective. The UN is a whole family. There's the whole issue of rights up front, which is part of the whole discourse. And in this whole thing, saying that, for example, OHCHR was given access to a prison, one would know that this is one of those prisons which is a model prison in Eritrea, and giving access for 15 minutes is not the best of situations, and monitoring of real prison and detention conditions take longer than that and should be open more. I'd like to again say thank you for this opportunity to have given me the opportunity to present the report of the Commission of Inquiry on behalf of my fellow commissioners, Mike Smith, the chair, and Victor Dankwa. And I would like to assure you that I will give as much energy and seriousness to the mandate which has been given to me, that I will continue fighting for the rights of Eritrean victims and give them a voice within the human rights within the UN. Thank you.
I should like to thank the distinguished Rapporteur Keetharuth for her words and final comments there. I'd like to thank delegations as well for what they said, and I'm very appreciative of Michael Link's forbearance. We are starting rather late now with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. Professor, we shall start with your report to the committee, and as sometimes happens, we won't conclude, but we shall continue first thing tomorrow morning with comments and questions that various delegations might wish to have. You now have the floor, sir.
Perdón, disculpe, profesor, creo que...
Sorry, forgive me, Professor, I believe there's a point of order.
El Estado de Palestina.
From the State of Palestine.
Sorry, Madam Chair, for taking the floor. I just would actually like to ask if, I know the committee has a very busy schedule, but due to the late hour, I would like to ask if the Professor has time tomorrow to present his presentation to the committee in order to give everybody a chance to listen to his presentation, to follow up with questions. Everybody has a very busy schedule, and it might be beneficial to be able to hear his presentation and have a full continuous hour, the same way other rapporteurs had the right to do that. And if his schedule permits, my delegation would be much more in favor of that. Thank you.
Lamentablemente tenemos la...
Alas, we are under pressure of time, and we have to include the Iranian report. We weren't able to deal with that, and then yesterday we had something as well we have to carry over. These are two more reports, so I would urge you, please, if we can continue now, and then tomorrow we will start straight off the bat. You have the floor now.
Okay. Madam Chair, Excellencies and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to present my first report to the General Assembly and the Third Committee as Special Rapporteur for this mandate. It is a great honor to be able to serve in this position. As an introductory observation to my remarks today, I would like to draw to the attention of the distinguished delegates that the government of Israel has continued with its persistent stance of non-cooperation with the Special Rapporteur's mandate. As it has acted towards my two immediate predecessors, the government of Israel made no response to my written request in June of this year to be allowed to visit Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, and I was not granted entry. I would remind the delegates that the cooperation of all member states is a fundamental obligation of United Nations membership, anchored in Articles 104 and 105 of the Charter of the United Nations, as well as in Article 6, Section 22 of the Conventions on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. The Special Rapporteur is very grateful to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan for hosting my mission this past summer, and to the many human rights NGOs, officials of the Palestinian government, and the UN officials who traveled from the occupied Palestinian territory to Amman to meet with me during my mission this past July, or who spoke to me via video conference, or who made written submissions. However, this can be no substitute for being able to visit the occupied Palestinian territory, to meet with people and organizations on the ground, and to make my own observations with respect to the state of human rights there. This stance of non-cooperation serves no one's interest, least of all the noble cause of human rights. You will have before you my full report, which reviews in some detail the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory at present. In the short time that I have today, allow me to highlight three particular issues of concern for your attention. Since October of last year, there has been a significant upsurge in violence in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. According to the latest figures, more than 230 Palestinians and at least 32 Israelis have been killed during the past 12 months, either during demonstrations or as a result of attacks or alleged attacks by Palestinians on Israelis and the lethal response by Israeli security forces. As Special Rapporteur, my concerns about this current climate are fourfold. First, violence, and particularly violence against civilians, by anyone is to be deplored. Also to be deplored is the frequency of what appears to be a disproportionate response by Israeli security forces, where too often the killing of Palestinians who are alleged to be involved in demonstrations or attacks is the first choice rather than the last resort. Second, statistics suggest that there is little to no accountability for these killings. Findings by Israeli human rights organizations demonstrate that cases brought before Israeli military law enforcement mechanisms lead to indictment only in the rarest of cases, resulting in near impunity for Israeli soldiers. Third, I am alarmed by the rise in the number of Palestinians being held in detention by Israel, particularly with regards to the growing use of administrative detention and with the large number of Palestinian children under the age of 18 who have been detained. And fourth, I am concerned about the increasingly desperate social and political climate that these attacks reflect. The deepening of the occupation and the utter absence of a political horizon leading to self-determination for the Palestinians have reinforced an atmosphere of despair and hopelessness. This does not excuse any violence, but it goes a long way to understanding why it is happening. The second theme that I want to highlight is the ongoing concern with respect to the occupying powers' frequent use of collective punishment in the form of punitive home demolitions, geographic closures, and severe infringements on the freedom of movement, as well as the almost decade-long comprehensive blockade of Gaza. Your Excellencies will know that any form of collective punishment is strictly prohibited under Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and the Human Rights Committees observed that the prohibitions on collective punishment is absolute and without exceptions. I would like to offer two brief observations with respect to collective punishment. First, the government of Israel has reinstated the practice of punitive home demolitions in 2014, and it has since been utilizing it with increasing frequency. By July of this year, it had already destroyed more Palestinian homes in 2016 under this policy than it had during the entire year of 2015. These demolitions, whose purpose is to punish the family members of somebody suspected in a crime, are illegal under international law precisely because they offend the foundational rule of law principle that an innocent person cannot be punished for a crime purportedly committed by somebody else. Second, Israel continues to employ the practice of geographic closures on parts of the occupied Palestinian territory. The widespread impact that these closures have on a large percentage of the population of the West Bank suggests an interest both in controlling as well as penalizing the residents. These types of broad restrictions on freedom of movement are in violations of Israel's obligations under human rights law. As one example, in early June of this year, 4 Israeli civilians were killed in a deplorable act at a popular shopping mall in Tel Aviv. The 2 Palestinians who were apprehended by the Israeli police were from the southern West Bank. Immediately following their arrests, the Israeli government revoked all 83,000 permits that it issued to the residents of the West Bank and Gaza to travel during Ramadan and sealed off the suspected attacker's entire hometown for a number of days. In the same general context, I would also like to voice my alarm with respect to the occupying powers' intensifying practice of forcible transfers. This has been occurring with particular frequency in East Jerusalem and the so-called Area C of the West Bank. These forcible transfers include the repeated demolitions of Arab Bedouin communities, the almost absolute denial by the occupation authorities of applications by Palestinians for housing and building permits, and the destruction of international humanitarian aid for these communities, particularly those being given by the European community. The ongoing practice of forcible transfer is closely tied to the Israeli settlement project. Both are illegal under international law, as recalled by the Security Council and the International Court of Justice, as well as a clear breach of Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention and a presumptive breach under Article 8 of the Rome Statute. Excellencies, the final theme from my report that I wish to present to you today relates to the right to development and its application to the occupied Palestinian territory. As you know, the Declaration on the Right to Development was adopted by the General Assembly in December 1986, and this year marks the 30th anniversary of its adoption. It provides that every human being and all peoples have an inalienable right to economic and social development that is equitable and just and fully observant of all human rights. This right applies with full force to a territory under occupation. In my report, I've examined the economic and social conditions of the Palestinians in the OPT through the lens of the Declaration on the Rights of Development. It must be stressed at the outset that the Palestinian economy is without parallel in the modern world. Its territorial components, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and Gaza, are physically separated from one another. Its largest geographic entity, the West Bank, has been divided by Israel into small islands of densely populated areas, disconnected from one another by a wall or by settlements, by bypass roads connecting the settlements to one another and to the Israeli transportation system, by roadblocks, by exclusive zoning laws, by restricted areas, and by military no-go zones. Within these areas occupied by Israel, the local political authority is likewise splintered. The Palestinian Authority has limited rule over a part of the fragmented archipelago in the West Bank. Gaza is governed by a separate political authority not accountable to the PA. And Israel has illegally annexed East Jerusalem. Furthermore, Israel has imposed a comprehensive land, sea, and air blockade on Gaza since 2007. Within the West Bank, Israel exercises full civil and security authority over Area C, which makes up over 60% of this territory, and which completely surrounds and divides the archipelago of Palestinian towns and cities, a hybrid situation that one human rights group has called occu-annexation. The OPT lacks any secure access, whether by sea, land, or air, to the outside world. All of its borders, with one exception, are controlled by Israel. Consequently, the ability of Palestinians to move freely and to trade reliably with the world and with each other is seriously circumscribed. No other society in the world faces such an array of cumulative challenges that include belligerent occupation, territorial discontinuity, political and administrative divergence, demographic confinement, and economic disconnectedness. The result has been a stifled and disfigured Palestinian economy that Israel, the occupying power, decisively controls and exploits for its own benefit. In 2014, real Palestinian GDP per capita was at virtually the same level as it was in 1999, with Gaza's real GDP per capita in real dollars standing at only 71% of its 1999 level. Unemployment in 2016 stood at 27% in the OPT, compared to 12% in 1999. In Gaza, the unemployment rate had reached 42%, with 58% of its youth without work. The World Bank has said that these are among the highest unemployment rates in the world. Poverty has been steadily increasing among Palestinians since 2012, with 26% of the population now deemed to be poor and 13% suffering from extreme poverty. Food insecurity is endemic, with an estimated 2.4 million people in the West Bank and Gaza projected to require some form of humanitarian assistance in 2016. Gaza in particular is suffering. In 2016, 2 years after the most recent conflict ended, only 45% of its energy needs are being met, causing 16 to 18 hours of daily power cuts. 70% of Gaza's population have only piped water supplies for 6 to 8 hours every 2 to 4 days. And 65,000 Gazans displaced from the 2014 war still do not have reconstructed homes. The World Bank in 2015 observed that the quality of life for the large majority of Gaza's citizens is hardly bearable. Excellency, this occupation, which will be 50 years old in 2017, is both seriously deficient in its respect for the legal principles and obligations embedded within the right to development, and has lasted well beyond any reasonable length for an occupying power acting in good faith. My recommendation, first and foremost, is to fully end the occupation at the earliest possible moment, for it is impossible to justify its continuation either in law or by any measure of justice. And because it is impossible to separate the occupation from the array of human rights and humanitarian violations that plagues this particular conflict. Among my recommendations to improve the immediate situation are the following. Israel must ensure that its practices covering the use of lethal force fully comply with international standards. It must end the practices of collective punishment, administrative detention, and forcible transfer forthwith. And it must commit itself to full and genuine accountability in its investigation of allegations of unlawful acts by its security forces. With respect to the right to development, Israel must allow for the movement of people and goods throughout the OPT. It must end the blockade of Gaza and lift all restrictions on imports and exports with due consideration to legitimate security concerns. And it must allow the Palestinian Authority to assume civil and security control over Area C and to end the geographic fragmentation of the OPT. Excellencies, I do not want to leave you with an entirely bleak and gloomy picture, as much as pessimism may be the justified sentiment in these circumstances. I do want to tell you how encouraged I have been to meet and to learn from the vibrant and energetic community of human rights defenders and humanitarian workers, Palestinians, Israelis, and internationals, who doggedly work on some of the most difficult and challenging issues within the occupation. They are fluent in the universal language of human rights and humanity. They face scorn and worse from those invested in the violation of human rights, and yet they remain more committed than ever to their indispensable work. The consistently high quality of their research, their reports, and their activism is an inspiration to the rest of us. If a just and compassionate peace is ever to come to the Middle East, we will owe much to these fearless advocates. Thank you, Excellencies, for your attention.
Agradezco mucho.
I should like to thank the distinguished Professor Michael Link for that statement on the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967. And we will now draw up a list of those who wish to speak straight away tomorrow morning when we start. We can open the list so that Cuba, Jordan, South Africa, Maldives, the Palestinian state of Palestine, Indonesia, European Union, Iran, Senegal, Norway, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and delegations are continuing to sign up. We shall start then at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I should like to thank the professor for remaining tomorrow morning in order to be able to answer questions put. And this will be immediately followed by the interactive dialogue with the special representative of the Special Secretary General in Myanmar and the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief, and the Special Rapporteur on human trafficking, particularly women and children. And then in the afternoon, we shall have the two statements which as yet have not been made by the Special Rapporteur on minorities and the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And if there is sufficient time tomorrow at the end of the afternoon, we shall start with a general discussion. So I now conclude, and the meeting stands adjourned.